Hi, everybody. I'm Selena Rezvani, and you're joining Women and Work Culture. This is a live stream, in case you haven't been here, all about those positive practices for boosting women's leadership in really actionable, meaningful ways. And today we're talking about a topic so close to my heart, all about how to turn down the volume on your own inner critic. I'm so lucky to be here today with somebody who's not only a coach extraordinaire, but a dear friend of mine, Cheryl Rice. Welcome, Cheryl.
Selena, it's an honor to be with you and your community. Hello. Thanks for having me.
The best. I'm so happy to have you. And yes, a big hello to our community who are joining, by the way, from Baltimore, Megan, Tampa Bay, Anissa, Mosen saying hello, Anna from Maryland, Kayania from Detroit, love this. Mosen's in Frankfurt, Philly suburbs. I love it. I'm so happy to have you all here. We love learning from experts like Cheryl right alongside you. Let me tell you a little bit about Cheryl before we dive in and get some of her pearls of wisdom. Cheryl works with women, in particular, eager to be those leaders in their own lives. Since 1990, she has done that, working on performance with individuals, teams, all about great performance, finding that vision and leadership in yourself. I can testify she's a fabulous speaker in her talks. Cheryl inspires women to really use their own voice and their vision. She's spoken at places like Wharton, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Campbell's Soup. She's been in publications like the Philly Inquirer, that's our hometown special paper, the Chicago Tribune, and even Maria Shriver's blog, Architects of Change. On a personal note, I think Cheryl and I went through one of those great tests of inner critic, those big moments. And I say that because we prepped together for our TEDx talks, which happened a day or two apart. We texted each other moral support and tips. We prepared together, talk about a bonding experience. And I owe you a lot for being such a great champion, Cheryl, in that.
Ditto.
As we dive in today, everybody, please send us your questions for Cheryl about how to stop your own inner critic from taking over. Okay, we have plenty of questions for her, but we want to hear yours. Such an impressive resume, people are saying, Cheryl. So, Cheryl, you clearly have a passion for helping people own their voice and their confidence. What kind of got you fired up about this and made this such a major mission for you?
You know, Selena, I think as with many of our passions, the seeds of my passion to help women kind of claim their own voice and be their own champion started even in my childhood when I was first sent to summer camp, and I was the most homesick summer camper you could ever imagine. And the only thing that really helped me was actually coaching other homesick campers who happened to be younger than me. And I found that if I could champion them, I was not only helping them, but I was also helping myself. And I think that really sowed the seeds for me wanting to be a coach in life and loving to champion my clients and my friends. And it wasn't until I was actually in my early 40s when, unfortunately, my mom passed away after a 6-month illness. And she had been my greatest champion, my greatest outer champion. And I realized not only did I lose my mom, but I lost my champion. And frankly, Selena, I didn't know how to do it for myself. And thus began my journey, which really led to two primary passions right now. One is it helped me write my book, Where Have I Been All My Life, which was really my journey from going from being kind of hijacked by my own inner critic to finding and declaring myself my own inner champion. And it changed my coaching in that no longer am I only there to support and champion my clients. I'm there to help them learn how to do it for themselves. And that's why I'm so passionate. I come by this honestly through my own struggles and really believing that ultimately, each one of us needs to find the wherewithal to befriend and champion and honor our own unfolding, warts and all. And that is the greatest gift of all that we really can give ourselves. And that's where my passion came from in a nutshell.
I love that story. And I think a lot of people can relate if you've been lucky enough to have somebody outside of you be that wonderful supportive voice. You also need it inside, and it's so nice to see a note here from Viva saying Cheryl did an amazing presentation on this very topic in 2019. Well, Cheryl, I see a question from Anissa I want to ask you, but I want to ask the same question to all of you joining us on the line. And the question is, can you define inner critic for us? And those of you in our community, tell us, what does inner critic sound like? Like, what's something your inner critic might say, or someone else's that you've heard? Go ahead, Cheryl. I'd love to hear your definition.
Yeah, so quite simply, and most people, especially women, don't have trouble defining their inner critic. It is that voice in our head that speaks to us with a harsh tone and frankly with some judgment and criticism and meanness. It's sometimes I call it in shorthand, the bully inside. It's not just our inner roommate, but it really has a tinge of meanness and sharpness and speaks to us in ways that frankly most of us would never speak to anyone else, let alone someone we care about.
Yeah. I remember you saying at one point you had people draw their inner critic.
That's a beautiful way of helping people identify their own inner critic. And we do this often, as Vibha can attest in the workshop I had the honor of doing in her community, was, drawing your inner critic, actually taking out a crayon and taking a moment to draw what your inner critic looks and sounds like. And for most of us, it has a very distinct sound, and it can be fun to grab one of your kids' crayons and actually do this. And in fact, I knew we were going to be speaking, so I took the liberty of drawing my inner critic, if you will. I don't know if your community can see this, but it's called the ruler. You see that, the ruler, and it looks like, a 12-inch ruler with a crown on its head. And that crown is really the judge telling me I'm not good enough in so many ways, or I'm too fat, or I'm too old, or I'm this or that. And I would imagine that people listening right now have their own version of that inner critic.
Yeah. May I interject with a few of them? Here's
Please.
One we heard from Michelle. My inner critic always tells me I'm not qualified enough. And you're not alone, Michelle, right? There's the I'm not blank enough, experienced enough, smart
That's
enough.
Right.
Leader-like enough, fill in the blank, right? Kiania is saying self-doubt. That's how it shows up. That's what it looks like. Brittany's saying it's a lack of giving yourself grace. Yeah. That grace you're willing to give other people, that slack, that you don't necessarily give yourself. We all hear you. For me, it sounds like you don't belong. Or these very black and white statements, you won't make it, or you're not right for that. And boy, it is sharp. It makes me think of a whip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very harsh and very dogmatic, and we can just hear the tone is not supportive at all, and it's diminishing and demeaning, and ultimately defeating. That's the problem. It's self-defeating, and it hurts. And it even hurts when I take examples like the ones we're hearing now. Even I hear it from others, and it kind of makes me want to recoil and say, don't hurt your beautiful, precious self, So it's real, and it's visceral in terms of the impact it has on us.
We all want to break some of this pattern, whether we have a little bit of it or a lot. We want to do better. I'm curious, what are some of the techniques that can help people have a different kind of voice, what you call an inner champion, that's more productive, more supportive?
Yeah, and I absolutely want to tell you some techniques, and I'm sure I'd love to hear from others what they do. I just want to take a moment, if I may, and just normalize it. I've had people, once we identify the inner critic, they actually criticize themselves for having a critic. And I say it is ubiquitous. So please, I don't want anyone to think they're alone in this or in the minority. Most people, especially most women in my experience, have some version of an inner critic. And it's really is about the volume, how pervasive it is, how loud it is. So that's one thing. I just want to normalize it before we talk about techniques. And in fact, one technique is just normalizing it and realizing there's nothing wrong with you. Another thing to recognize is that there's actually often, and this is a technique, to ask the inner critic, is there a kernel of truth? Is there a kernel of truth in what the critic has to tell you? And for instance, when I was writing my book, and I'm not a professional writer, but I have writers in my family, and I would think, who are you to be a writer? You don't know the difference between an adverb and an ad lib, and you're going to write a really bad book. And the truth was, Selena, that was the nugget of truth I had to listen to. It was totally possible I could write a bad book. Anybody can write a bad book. It's easier to write a bad book than a good book. So once I isolated that kernel of truth, I was then able to do some good problem solving and say, thank you, ruler. Thank you, ruler. You're just concerned that I'm going to, do something that might embarrass me. So what can I do to make sure I don't write a bad book? May not be a #1 bestseller, but it's not going to be bad. So that mobilized me to get an editor, get a copy editor, get some readers, and do all the things I needed to do to at least give myself the confidence that I was doing the best book I could write at that time. So the inner critic always has a nugget of wisdom if we pause to listen. So it's pausing, recognizing the inner critic is not there to hurt you. It is ultimately there to protect you, and take the moment to listen. Another technique, and this now has some great science attached to it, so I'm really excited to tell people about this, is called distanced self-talk. And this is something from Ethan Kross, who's a psychologist at the University of Michigan, who's been studying this. And he found that when we can talk to ourselves in the second person, so to say you or to say your name, it actually lowers our stress, enables us to tap into our wisdom, and also increases or decreases our likeliness for rumination. So instead of just saying, I stink at this, I'll never, get this job if I apply, I'm not going to speak up in the meeting. Talk to yourself in the second person. Say, hey, you're doing your best. Or, hey, Cheryl, I see how hard you prepared for this meeting. If you focus on what you're going to be okay. So speak to yourself in the second person. That's something I can honestly testify to doing on a regular basis. Makes a huge difference. And even, speaking kindly to yourself, just, hey, sweetie, and you can see when I say this, I always just naturally put my hand on my heart, which is a beautiful self-soothing technique. Just put your hand on your heart, or for some people, it's very tender to put your hand on your cheek. Or if you feel really brave, put your hand on your belly, which a lot of women resist for a lot of other reasons. But just, those tender spots, and to talk in those sweet ways. So those are just some techniques, Selena, that really make a difference. And when you're speaking to yourself, imagine that you're talking to someone you love, whether it's your child, your best friend, your dog, someone who just automatically infuses compassion and warmth. That's how you want to talk to yourself and speak to yourself. That's the path to growth.
These are great techniques. And it's really counterintuitive, by the way, to check for a kernel of truth. Because I almost thought you'd say, look, this isn't real. Don't believe it. But it's counterintuitive and powerful to say, maybe I do need to prepare a little better, so that I can come at this in a confident way. The other thing I just want to put out there to people that was one of the biggest light bulbs in my own career around this is really ask yourself, what good has come out of your inner critic? Like, what things can you point to in your life or your career that have been due to that voice? For me, the answer was not a lot, nothing, because it kept me in the dugout watching everybody else play the game. And so, that's just a prompt I'd give you all. What has that inner critic really done for you? On the flip side, what could the supportive coach like voice do for you? A lot, I think. So happy you're enjoying this, Anna. I think there's a crisis of confidence right now for a lot of people. COVID's knocked a lot of people's confidence down and a lot of feeling isolated. You tell a story that I can't not think about. And it was a woman that you coached saying to you, Cheryl, I love my job, I love my family, but I hate my life. Will you please tell us how that manifested and how you coached her through that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. She was a woman in one of my group coaching programs, and this was how she introduced herself on the first night. And I think she had myself and the other woman who heard her courage in saying that in tears when she said that. And even now, and this was years ago, it still gives me chills because it was so poignant and so vulnerable. And so in our work, as much of coaching involves, in my experience, there's some outer strategies and inner strategies, and we need them both. So we recognize first the cost she was paying. And for her, it meant she was always feeling guilty. When she was with her kids, she felt she should have been working more. When she was working more, she felt she was neglecting her kids, who at that time were school aged. So she couldn't win. And what's worse is she felt guilty for feeling guilty because she knew she was so blessed to have a really good job in a really beautiful family. So first, of course, we had to unhook from that feeling of guilt and realize that what she needed was, first of all, to learn how to set boundaries, because she wasn't anywhere. If she was at home thinking about work, she wasn't really at home and she really wasn't at work. So part of it was setting boundaries and learning how to say no and not feel guilty, to see saying no as really an investment in care for herself and others. And the inner strategy was really about being able to get on her own side and be present. So frankly, Selena, we talked about just how to be present to the gift of the moment, whether the gift was work that really tapped into her strengths, which she loved using, or being a mom, which she cherished. So we really talked about some techniques of mindfulness and presencing to make it so she could set some boundaries. And gratitude, of course, was also a strategy. And it helped. I mean, I still get Christmas cards from her once a year telling me about, how her life is unfolding in such beautiful ways. So those inner and outer strategies, getting on her own side, and also practicing what I call good enough living. In any, she had such high standards, and I'm sure in your practice, you see this too. Women who put perfection above all are usually the most unhappy. And so we really talk about having really an attitude of good enough being enough, and not feeling like that's a default, but seeing the wisdom in that to having a life of abundance.
That's beautiful. Wow. I think a lot of people can relate to some piece of that. Wow, if I told somebody about these distinct parts of my life, they sound great or wonderful, but something's not adding up here, right, to feel full or right or complete. I love your term, get on your own side. It's so right, profound. I had a mom growing up who always said, be your own best friend. And I think of it like that,
Absolutely. Yeah, because when you think about it, and this isn't woo-woo, I just want to say this is the most practical thing we can do, because who else is with us 24/7? And Selena, nobody, in case your mom taught you a little bit about how to talk to yourself, but most of us are not taught to have really constructive conversations with ourselves. And left to our own devices, the media, culture, there's a whole host of influences that lead us to cultivating some really bad habits when it comes to self-talk and self-care. And so now we're all at an age and a stage where it's time for us to take responsibility and become really aware of our talk, and when need be, edit it and improve, upgrade our conversations with ourselves. We won't regret it.
I love it. So let me encourage our community. If you have questions for Cheryl, this is your chance. She has so many truth bombs on this topic that please do chime in with your questions for her. Cheryl, let's say we're getting better at this after this live. We're maybe more aware about that inner critic, that voice. Let's say we notice it, in the moment. Is there anything we could do as we're saying, oh, okay, it's starting?
Yeah. Say hi. This is where, coming back to like doing something like writing or drawing, come up with a name for your inner critic. So then you can really quickly, in the moment when it starts showing up, you can say, hey, ruler, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. And then you know what? I'll talk to you in a few hours. Just hear the moment, because what does not work is telling it to shut up or bullying your inner bully. It's just an arms race. It's not going to really win the day. So what does is, when you notice it, just acknowledge it, see if you can very quickly extract that kernel of truth, and then move on. Say, let's pick this up in a couple hours. So coming up with the shorthand name, and one of the beautiful things about that drawing is it adds levity. We take ourselves and our critics so seriously. Just like we can laugh about it. And in my workshops, we share it. And then women really start to giggle and they realize, okay, I am so much more than my inner critic. Come on now, right? So that's the beauty of what you're doing right now, is creating community so people know they're not alone. So you and your girlfriends at your next book club, just bring a crayon, tell everyone to draw their inner critic, and then have a laugh at it and kind of claim it. And nothing of us is unworthy, even our critic. And that's really important to recognize.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. So it's not something to be banished. It's not something, to send to the naughty corner, never to be heard from again, but it's something to kind of embrace on a level and reason with, like,
and hey, have compassion for, and to talk sweetly to. I know you're really scared that I might not nail this presentation, or I might not get this job if I go for it. But you know what? I can handle it. So you want it, like, the inner critic is sometimes like just a child, a tantruming child. And it just needs a little bit of our compassion. We are so much bigger ultimately than our critic. It's the power we give it that distorts the impact it has and gives it just too much of a voice. You wouldn't give a toddler the keys to your car, right? Yeah. But you wouldn't also put the toddler in a closet either and say, only come out at dinner. You wouldn't do that. You'd find a way, right? Right. It's really important.
One of my favorite things you said was around having a sense of humor about it and lightening up a little, which is, again, not intuitive to do when you're in the throes of doubt. But I like to think of my own inner critic like a helicopter parent who's overprotective and kind of wants to wrap me up in bubble wrap and protect me from it, from everything. And it's like saying, I got this, Mom. I got this, Dad. I can do this.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
We have a great question here from Masa, who's asking, do you think culture to culture, the concept is different? Some cultures are more expressive, for example, than others.
I would imagine there are differences in how the inner critic shows up. I can't speak to specific ones, but I'd ask Masa. I'm curious what her experience is in that. I think generally having that internal voice is pretty pervasive. But again, I have not done cultural studies to really compare and contrast. But I'd be curious if Masa has information in that.
Yeah, or some hypotheses of your own, right? Because, I think in some cultures, there is more like self-deprecating humor, let's say, than in other cultures where you're, might be the butt of the joke. There's another comment here, which I think is powerful, which many of us can relate to. It is quite tiring to be searching for perfection and judging oneself all the time. Do you have any words of advice for people struggling with that tired search for getting it perfect?
Yeah, I love the recognition. It is tiring. So this is where that song, Let It Go, comes in. Let it go. Let it go. And, it's not about perfection. It's such an illusion. And if you knew that the quest for perfection was really a sentence of disappointment, would it still be that compelling? Like, if you could really remind yourself that it's elusive, It's not, it's just fake. It's a fake kind of fool's gold. And instead, it really robs us of our lives as we're living it. So I would focus on letting go of the perfection. The tiredness is a beautiful indicator that it's kind of not serving you. And then think about what does serve you and where real nourishment comes from. And real nourishment comes from accepting ourselves for all of our strengths and all of our struggles and loving ourselves to wholeness. That's where, that's not exhausting. That's luscious. That's nourishing, is to really learn how to be with ourselves, all of ourselves, on the journeys that we're on that are uniquely ours.
That's beautiful. And I want to add a point, which is that having interviewed so many people who've made it to the top of organizations, one of my biggest surprises was hearing from many of them that, you know what, I'm not perfect. I didn't get this the first try, this job or this thing. This idea that, look, I'm not perfect, but I'm more tenacious than most people. Yeah. That really stuck with me.
Yeah.
That maybe perfect isn't really where it's at.
And that tenacity, Selena, is that what I'm hearing underneath what they're saying is, I'm okay. If I fail, that's okay. Like, that's part of the journey, are those missteps and failures, but I can tolerate failure. In fact, not only tolerate it, I can seek out opportunities to fail because I see them as opportunities to grow. And this is just to bring it back to inner critic, this is so vital. We want to, people think if they have an inner critic, that actually helps them grow, but quite the contrary. It stifles our growth because we are less willing to take risks and to seek out opportunities for growth if we fear that we're just going to be criticizing ourselves. So you want to become an incredibly soft landing. We all want to be that soft landing that says, hey, give it a shot. What's the worst that can happen? You're going to learn something. If it doesn't work out, it's going to fuel the seeds of your next success. So that's my guess as to what those successful women have learned to keep going. Right. The tenacity is because they're not afraid to fail, because they know they will be on their own side no matter what.
That's really beautiful. Really One of them said, and I think about this analogy, they said, it's not that, I worry if I go out all the way on the branch, that I can't handle it. It's knowing if the branch breaks, I can fly. Like, I can do this. And I think there's something really beautiful there. I want to talk about something else in your work that I think is really powerful. You often, champion this idea that you need to celebrate your wins. Will you tell us why just glossing over your wins, not acknowledging them, is not the way to go?
Yeah, and I'll do it with a very brief example. A client I had just gotten a major promotion, which she was uber qualified for. And I asked her, I said casually, actually it was near the end of our first meeting, I said, so how did you celebrate? And she said, well, I've only told my husband. And this was weeks later. And I said, you haven't told anybody else? And she said, no, because if I tell them I was hired, I'm just going to have to tell them when I get fired. So that, again, one of those comments, Selena, that goes right to my heart. And so her homework was to actually find respectful ways that she felt comfortable telling other people about her promotion, which she did. And I think what that does when we rob ourselves of the opportunity to share our wins, we really, number one, rob ourselves of the opportunity to find compassion for when we haven't won, and we're depriving, first of all, ourselves of inhabiting the good things that most of us are striving for. So there's a kind of disembodiment and disownership, which isn't really healthy for us. And it also deprives others of being inspired, especially those younger than us, or people who love us. It deprives them of a chance to champion and celebrate us, or to be inspired by our path. So done with humility and kind of grace, as one of the women said earlier, it is an essential practice in kind of owning our who we are and our strengths. It is really essential. Again, people often think it's like, oh, I'm bragging. Well, that's the other end of the spectrum. No one's asking you to brag, but we are asking you to try on just claiming your truth, claiming your accomplishments and letting other people celebrate that with you. Yeah.
I love that. One of my mentors told me, if it's true, it's not bragging. Let's say
Very
that
well
together,
said.
all of us.
Yeah,
If it's true,
absolutely.
it's not bragging.
Right.
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 You know, if you created that efficiency, you launched XYZ, you forged ABC relationship, those are facts, you know,
Yes.
and deserve your ownership.
Right. That's right. And to teach other people to do that for themselves by modeling it.
I love it, because no matter what your level, there are lots of eyeballs watching you, watching how you take a compliment, how you handle a setback.
That's right.
You know, how you handle a straight up mistake that you completely made, and watching and maybe fashioning themselves after what you do.
Yes, it just all does come down to, realizing that we as individuals matter. Our lives matter. Our strengths matter. Our sorrows matter. Our wounds matter. Our humanity matters. And for us, again, to learn how to first and foremost just legitimize that. Just first and foremost, to legitimize our own humanity for ourselves, really, to me, is the foundation from which just all good things can spring. Like the most important elements of growth in life spring from that essential belief that, we belong, we're enough, and we matter.
That is so beautiful. I want to ask you, Cheryl, do you have some parting words, something you really want to stick in our minds when we think about this inner critic topic? This is our tradition to end with a parting truth bomb.
Yeah, I would just say the parting truth bomb is realizing that there is no getting it right. There's just getting on your own side with warmth and with abiding friendship, and realizing in your bones that you matter. That's my truth bomb.
I love it. I love it. You matter. So a great prompt for all of you. What's one accomplishment that you could share with another person today? A meaningful accomplishment that matters to you, instead of being bashful. How about sharing it, relishing it? That's something Cheryl's taught me how to do. Cheryl, you talk about nourishment. You've given all of us so much nourishment today. You are a great gift to the world, helping people move some of these blocks, sometimes self-imposed blocks, so we can do big things, and really set out to meet our goals. Thank you. For all of you who might like to stay in touch with Cheryl and follow her, please do. You're going to see notes in the comments to connect you to her website, her LinkedIn and Facebook profiles, her book, and her wonderful social movement she somehow found time to launch in all of this other exciting stuff called the You Matter Marathon. So thank you, Cheryl. I hope you also stay in touch with me, everybody. I would love for you to do that, including my complete confidence course on LinkedIn. Sign up to be part of my newsletter. Follow me here on LinkedIn if you're not already. I want to say thank you again. Stay healthy, stay well, and lead on.